Oh my gosh. You've been writing this
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. The break was productive and relaxing and so forth. And welcome back to the CBC Friday Seminar Series for the spring. We got a great series lined up, so make sure to pay attention to the announcements that come out and so forth. And then the Udry lecture will be the capstone of that in late March. Exactly. Just keep an eye out for that. So today I'm very pleased to introduce Kathy Harris and Carolyn Halpern, who are going to take us through Wave 5 of Ad Health, the ideas behind it, the conceptualization of it, and the data that now are beginning to come out from Wave 5. At the end, I'll add some comments on the plans for Wave 6. We've got a full slate of slides and ideas and figures, so I'm going to get started right away and turn it over to Kelly.
Okay. Great, thank you. Hello, everybody. It's really my great pleasure to report on new data coming out of Ad Health and let everybody know about the future direction. I'd like to first step back and just highlight 25 years of Ad Health here at CPC. This began as a program project in 1994 in response to a congressional mandate to fund a study of adolescent health. It's been funded by NICHD with co-funding from many other federal agencies for over 4 program project grants. The original design was innovative in that it obtained independent measures of the social context of adolescent life in the school, among their peers and friendships, romantic dyads, neighborhoods, and family. And we disseminated the first data in 1997 and developed enlightened policies to release very highly sensitive data on romantic pairs and adolescents to a wide multidisciplinary user base. And these dissemination policies have actually been used by many other studies in the field since then. Well, we really never imagined at the time that it would have this impact. We have 50,000 users around the globe. Our favorite line to say is that there is a new article that is based on Ad Health that's published every day of the week. Many books, lots of master's theses and dissertations, other independent grants, and over 2,000 citations to the Ad Health database, the Ad Health study, sorry. So I really want to acknowledge the Ad Health team. This is the team at Wave 5. It's really just a star-studded staff, I should say. And it really takes me back. I mean, when we started Ad Health in 1994, we were really a mom and pop shop. It was just Nick Udry, Peter Bierman, myself, a project manager, and Joyce Tabor was our data manager, and then a bunch of students. And we've now grown, I'm not going to go through all these names, but we've now grown into almost over 25 staff. And I do have to mention, I'm not sure if Stephen's here, but I left off Stephen Liu, who is our new web programmer. Sorry about that. So we have a couple of transitions. Wave 5 was a major transition, and I'll talk about that. And as many of you know, we're going through a transition in the leadership. Myself and Carolyn Halpern have been the director and deputy director since 2004. Bob Hummer is going to take over as director in October, officially. And Allison Elio will also take over as deputy director. For this, we're in a sort of bridge period between now and October, when the grant actually transitions to be funded by NIA. So during this time, Bob and I are co-PIs. So any questions or issues or problems or complaints, please take them to Bob. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the design and data. Carolyn will cover the survey data and also talk about her new study. And then I'll come back and present some early findings from Wave 5 And also just briefly mention the Ad Health Parent Study. Those data are also now available. And then Bob will finish up with wave 6. So just as a reminder of what we have in Ad Health, I talked about its beginnings. I'm not finished showing. Let's see, I'll just click here and see. Oh, I want to do that. Okay. So this is, Ad Health was a school-based design. We launched it in 1994. It didn't show up on that either. Okay. Anyway, I don't mind pointing. And this is really one to highlight. This is the prospective Ad Health cohort that we've been following over time across 5 waves. And the wave 5 data were collected in 2016-18. I'm going to show you a little bit about this. And the adults are now, or the adult cohort are now adults, 32 to 42. And we also collected a follow-up of the parents 20 years after wave 1. Okay, so these were the overall goals of wave 5. We wanted to re-interview the Ad Health cohort members to collect the social, environmental, behavioral, and biological data, the same data we've been collecting across all of the waves for the most part. But we really wanted to begin to track the emergence of chronic disease in early adulthood. And we also wanted to build on the life course history of respondents by adding and refining some of the early life failures of birth and childhood. Adolescence, Ad Health began in adolescence, so we missed that period of childhood and birth. We wanted to try to fill that in at wave 5. We did that by asking retrospective questions about birth and childhood, and also attempted to collect birth records of respondents born in a subset of the states. We bring all of these data together with the existing longitudinal data, and we're looking at a 40-year life course history to test hypotheses about the developmental origins of health and disease. This is pretty much what structured our proposal in wave 5. So there were a lot of changes in wave 5 that were quite challenging. Many of these were imposed on us by NICHD. I guess the main one that was imposed on us was the cost. NICHD wondered why we were coming back to them to fund wave 5 when our sample was in the 30s. NIA said, you're too young, go back to NICHD. It's a little bit of tussle there, and NICHD just asked us to come in under a cap of funding. And so we made the decision at that point to go to a web mail mode instead of in-person, which is of course a lot more expensive. So we shifted from in-person interviews then to a mixed mode. We used webmail and also phone and in-person, and I'll show you that. Because of that shift, we had to reduce the questionnaire length from 90 minutes to 50 minutes in the home, or in the in-person survey. We also shifted from an intensive sort of 1-year data collection period to continuous interviewing over 3 years. And then we collected biological data separately by using a biological data subcontractor, and we also got venous blood instead of blood spots, which we had gotten earlier. We also sampled non-respondents. So this is what the interview looks like. Yeah, they're oh, okay. All right, so I don't see it here. Okay, help somebody.
Yeah, okay. It's a new year. It's pretty sure.
I can't see that. Oh, that's how I do it. Any questions? I can answer them right now. We do have time for questions in between, so Alexis.
How do you know how good the retrospective birth data is yet?
Birth data?
Or the childhood life history?
Yeah, we don't know how good it is yet because we just released the data. That's going to be our answer to everything. Yeah, not really. But I should say that we did ask retrospective questions about childhood illnesses and health at waves 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's actually a fair amount of literature out there. The PSID has done this. James Smith has written a couple articles comparing like retrospective questions about during childhood's, you know, health and illness with, you know, going back to actual administrative records. So, so at least we have 3 reports of somewhat similar health experiences that will help us with the life. Question. Oh, great, great.
For some reason, because of our displays, the pointer here just disappears. So
Yeah, I was
we
looking
use
for it.
this. We also took this opportunity to get rid of this. This is what happens. We have an overflow upstairs. I'm guessing somebody's messing with this. So I may go upstairs and take a look. Real quick.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm just letting you know. Okay, so all the transitions. So we were going to web and mail. We had to reduce the questionnaire. We're in the field continuously. I think I said all this. Okay. That's right. This is where I was. These are the data we're collecting: survey, biological, geographic, and then state of birth to get the birth records. The other new thing that we did was we identified all deaths for death surveillance. So here's the sampling structure. We split the eligible sample into 3 separate independent, all nationally representative random samples. And then we administered these sort of sequentially, you know, over these years. We did something special with sample 2, and what we did is we split that then into, I haven't used it, I don't think I've ever used it. Into 2 subsamples. Sample 2B, we administered in person in the home, the way that we had administered it in all previous waves. And I'll tell you why in the next. So in this mixed mode survey, we've got a web, it's about 50 minutes total. The paper survey, we tried to make look exactly the same as the web to reduce mode effects, so same visual presentation. Sample 2B that I just pointed out, it's about 1,100, and these are in-person administered to replicate the context that we have administered the survey in all previous waves to estimate mode effects. And we are in the process of analyzing those mode effects now, and we'll prepare a user guide for how to deal with those. We obtained consent for the biomarker collection during the survey. And then, as I mentioned, we sampled non-respondents. And then what we did is, for the most part, you know, went to their home, knocked on the door, handed them the laptop computer, and asked them to take the web survey. You know, again, to try to reduce the mode effects. And then we had a brief telephone. Some of the non-response follow-up was also done by phone. I just wanted to mention that we did embed a couple experiments in sample 1 to see which, if any of these approaches resulted in greater response rates. One treatment was just a differential incentive based on a propensity model for you know, how likely they were to respond. And then another treatment was whether or not respondents would prefer a modular survey, so 2 20-minute little modules, or just one long 50-minute. I think Carolyn might talk a little bit about that. Basically, what we found is that respondents much preferred the singular survey. Even if we gave them 2 modules, they sat down and took them both together. And the incentives, you know, the higher incentive that we gave to the lower propensity respondents, you know, it helped maybe a little, but not significantly. You know, it probably wasn't high enough. The lower incentive that we gave to the high propensity, I hope I said that right first time, you know, it worked. I mean, I think one thing we found is that those people who have a high propensity to respond to the survey, they hardly need any incentive. They're just going to do it. Here's the results, the overall sample. We ended up with 12,300. I think you'll notice that this is a bump down in terms of N from our previous waves. We have a lower response rate. It's called an effective response rate because we sampled non-respondents. First time we've ever done that. but we also have a lower N because we sampled non-respondents. We didn't really go after every single one, beat down the door until they responded. You have to get used to that. Within the survey, 66% said yes, please. I'd love to have a physical exam and biomarkers, but issues that we ran into with scheduling and lining people up and people who were in faraway places, we ended up with less than 66%, you can see, of 12,300 who actually provided us with biomarkers. And I think over time we'll get better with that. Here's the distribution on who took what. Most people did take the web. We have a very small handful that took the paper. In person, of course, that includes sample 2B, and some people took both. Since we're not going to really present the biological data because these data are not quite ready to be released, here's what we're going to release. It's the same measures that we collected at wave 4, but we've got 2 new measures on kidney disease, creatinine, and cystatin C. The vital events data, to date we've received about vital records for 3 states, birth records. What we plan to do is release birth weight, gestational age, other characteristics of birth circumstances, not circumferences. And then, we've had our death surveillance. I'll show a little bit of this later. We've identified about 450 deaths and have collected their death certificates, and we're getting together some gold standard information for that. I should say that because we don't have all the data, we don't even have the biological data yet, our research project part, hasn't really made a lot of progress, but we're getting ready for that right now. And there are many other investigators and faculty who are part of the research piece of Wave 5, including Claire Yang and Ken Boland, Taylor Hargrove, and others. So just for, you can see what the biological data looks like across the waves of bad health, with the addition of the renal markers. And this is about, I think, where I end. We've had 2 data releases. The first release is we released sample 1 in November of 2017. We really knew that users did not want to wait for 5 years for the data. We got some preliminary data out on sample 1, and there's been some research on that. The full Wave 5 survey data was released in December 18th. I've got a typo up here, I'll have to explain. 70 people, so it was released December 18th, so it's really only been 2 weeks, that 1 week in December, and this first week for people to request the data, but 70 people have asked for it, 40 have gotten it. The biomarker data will be released in 2020. That's going to first include the anthropometric, the cardiovascular, and medications data, end of January, February, and then the blood assays will come a little later in March or April. And then this line is, you can see, I just copy and pasted, sorry, nobody has received the biomarker. Like the worst typo to make. No, we haven't. It's coming. And contextual data will be released, probably around May. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Carolyn, who will talk about more about the survey data that is released. Wait, I don't want to take that. Sure.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. We jump right in because we have a lot of stuff. This shows the questionnaire content across the 5 waves of data collection. The bolded text means that that's a new area of investigation for that particular wave. And you can see for wave 5, there's a lot of overlap with earlier waves for longitudinal analysis. And then there's the retrospective childhood health that Kathy mentioned earlier. So this shows survey completion by the different modes that Kathy described. So you can see that on average, about 90 to 100% of the survey was completed with the min and maximum values on the right there. You can also see that sample 2B with 100% completion is obviously a function of having an interviewer there to help you urge you along to keep going through the survey. But overall, given that they were in their home doing it on their own, we feel like, 95%, that's pretty good. And then this shows percentages of respondents who skipped an entire section of the survey. It ranges from virtually 0 to 2.4%. One of the things that I found interesting about these numbers, and I know they're a little hard to see, is that something like income, where you think of it as a sensitive thing. So this is 0.5% skipped that whole section. But then personality, which is an easy, quick section, almost 2% skipped the whole section. So it's interesting in terms of there's not an obvious pattern for what's skipped and what's not. And then this shows some illustrative item missingness. I picked out several items that you would think of as sensitive content. And again, you can see that very few people skipped these items. So that's probably a plus of the in-home web-based survey. And then finally, in terms of data quality, here is just one example of looking at consistency of responses within the survey. So of the respondents who reported getting their health insurance through work, less than 1% reported they didn't have a job and or never had a job. So I'm guessing now in hindsight that may be a function of partners insurance that they're talking about. And then of the entire sample, less than 1% reported a personal income that was greater than the household income. So the data quality, I think, looks quite good. So a few demographics and fun findings for you. So the sample is equally split between male and female. The average age is 37 with a range from 33 to 44. The race ethnicity distribution looks pretty similar to the earlier waves of AdHealth data. This is the highest education level for respondents. You can see that kind of in the middle there, high school education, some vocational, technical, or community college training, or a technical degree, or 20% have a college degree. And this is current marital status. More than half are currently married. 27% have never been married. And then that's about 12% who have had at least one divorce. And in terms of where they live, 86% live in their own home. Interestingly, 8% live in their parents' home. And the mean household size is 3.6 and ranges from 1 to 14 people. And then in terms of occupation and socioeconomic indicators, 82% are currently working, and of those, the majority are either satisfied or very satisfied with their job. About 8% have ever served in the military, and more than 20% would be in debt if they, this is their own assessment, would be in debt if they liquidated all of their assets and tried to pay off all their debts. And almost 17% have been evicted from their home since 2008. And I failed to mention, but these are weighted estimates, so they're the kind of like the real numbers. And then this is the social ladder that we've used a couple of times in I think waves 4 and 5. And you see about half of the sample places themselves in the upper half of this ladder, which reflects a distribution of people who have the most money, education, and most respected jobs. So I think that's kind of interesting too. So some other fun findings. One of the new things in wave 5 is that we asked an item about gender expression. So it's on average, how do you think people would describe your appearance, style, or dress? Male responses are in blue and female responses are in green. And there's definitely a distribution. One of the things that I find interesting is that among females, 33% think that others would see them as very feminine, versus more than half of males think that others would see them as very masculine. And then this is the sexual orientation identification question that we've used since wave 3. And it goes from, again, males are blue and females are in green. You can see the distribution there. This is pretty similar to what we've seen across the different waves. But the thing to note is that people do move across these categories over time. And I kind of thought at wave 5 that would be less true because they're older, but it's not. I mean, there's still a lot of fluidity in terms of people, how they identify. Here's current relationship happiness. So happily, the majority are happy in their current relationship. But on the downside, almost 10% of our respondents reported that they had slapped, hit, or kicked their partner in their current relationship, or that they, that they were the victim of that violence. And about 6% reported that they themselves had perpetrated that violence with their partner. General health, ironically, as we know, a sample is not really very healthy, but the majority of our sample see their own health as good to excellent. And then a couple of interesting things. This is how often people reported that they vote. And I thought it was interesting that similar percentages report that they never vote and that they always vote. And then finally, how they describe themselves in terms of political orientation. So a nice little bell curve here. Most of the people, half the sample identifies as middle of the road. I'll let you interpret that yourself in terms of our current situation. So next I want to describe a newer study that Kathy mentioned. It's called the Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity, Socioeconomic Status, and Health Across the Life Course Study, or SOGI-SES, quite a mouthful. I'm the co-PI, and my collaborator is Kareth Conran, who's at the Williams Institute at UCLA. And the sort of orient you to the study, it's well documented, I'm sure most of you know this, that there are a lot of different kinds of health disparities for sexual and gender minorities. It ranges from mental health, violence, HIV, access to health care. It's pretty broad. And we argued in our grant application that AdHealth is the ideal study with which to study this population. And here's why. There are more than 3,000 respondents who are sexual or gender non-conforming in the AdHealth sample. And they were not selected into the sample on the basis of those characteristics. And that's what makes it really unique in this field. They're diverse. Yeah, I mean, they're there because it's a big population study. So it's diverse in terms of race, ethnicity, and SES. And it has this incredibly unique aspect of 20 years of prospectively collected data on that population. So it really is a unique study in order to study these kinds of disparities. So we're using minority stress theory to orient the study. And that's because there are a lot of stressors that this population shows elevated levels of discrimination, violence, rejection, internalized stigma. And we're arguing, and this is a piece of this theory that's not widely used, I think, and that is that we're arguing that if there are chronic SES challenges, that's a chronic stressor. And that could be one of the important factors underlying the health disparities that we see. And if you're interested later, I can tell you why we think how those economic things would play out. So basically the aims of the SOGI-SES study are to develop a new survey module to try to capture information that's particularly relevant to sexual and gender minorities and to make a deeper dive on some of the SES information. So we'll conduct an ancillary web survey with all the sexual and gender minorities in AdHealth and a comparison sample of cisgender heterosexuals. We will prepare data and documentation for dissemination to AdHealth users. As you know, all ancillary studies with AdHealth those data become part of the AdHealth archive. And like I said, in our spare time at the end of the project, you always run into a time issue, but our goal is to conduct substantive analyses on one of the outcomes that might be of interest, and that's mental health inequities. This is our, probably you can't see very well, algorithm, but we decided that we would limit our sampling to people who participated in wave 5. And so if they're in wave 5 and they have a wave 1 sampling weight, then we're picking up anyone who identifies as not 100% heterosexual, who's discordant for sex assigned at birth and gender identity, discordant sex assigned at birth and gender expression, and then if they've reported a same-sex partner ever or in the past 12 months. And that yields more than 3,000 respondents. And then of the cisgender heterosexuals, we're sampling 1,500 from the 8,000 balance. And so we went around with different strategies about how to do this. It got pretty complicated, but basically we decided that we needed to stratify the sample on the basis of sex assigned at birth, race, and poverty. And we're going to sample with equal allocation within those different strata to yield a 1,500 size sample. And so here's where we are now. Our questionnaire is finalized, yay! And we're going to add to RTI today for review. Our sampling plan is finalized. Our goal is to launch the survey in either April or May 2020. And we're hoping that then we can release the data to users sometime in 2022. And we'll now turn it over to Bob.
Okay, Kathy.
Okay, Kathy, sorry.
You want to take a question?
If you like, does anyone have questions about what I just presented?
I had one question actually.
Sure,
On
Bob.
the slide where you talked about the people that skipped an entire section of the questionnaire, the way it was arranged on the x-axis, did that go from the beginning to the end of the questionnaire? Because it trailed up at the end, and I wonder if that was just because they were getting to the end and they got tired of doing it, and that's why they were
Yeah.
higher.
I meant to look at that because I thought that might be a logical question. So thank you for asking. I didn't get a chance to look, but my recollection, and Sarah, you can help me.
It looked like it did. I didn't see all of them from what I saw.
If the order is the same, yeah. So that's clearly a factor, especially I think on the paper survey, because you can kind of look ahead and say, oh my God, look at all these questions that are still there, you know. So it's, yeah, but that's a great observation. Okay, Kathy, sorry.
Oh, no, that's good. Okay. Okay, great. Let's see. So, I mean, Carolyn just presented a lot of the early, preliminary data on the full sample, but we have a couple of publications that got out based on sample 1 data that I thought I would just highlight among these three. The first paper, attempted to look at what some of our measures of despair are within AdHealth across the waves, sort of in response to all the attention to the case indeed report showing that that rates of death during midlife were increasing primarily due to drug, alcohol, and suicide causes, and called them the deaths of despair. So a couple papers sort of popped up, and we were one of them. We thought this would be a little bit of a premonition, given the AdHealth cohort is a little, just sort of approaching midlife. And what we found, I mean, I know you can't see these very well, but what we found, so their main finding, of course, is that all the action was happening among low-educated whites. But as you can see in suicide ideation and in particular depressive symptoms, the patterns are the same for all race and ethnic groups by education, low and high. I mean, the levels are of course different, but you don't see any big uptick, for any toward, these sort of later ages, which are overlapping with the period of time that they were looking at. And you find the typical patterns that you always find that, that whites, have higher levels of suicide ideation. African American, this is particularly low education, have higher levels, and a little bit of a mix. And I mean, our main finding that came out of this is that this doesn't seem to be a pattern that's occurring just among whites, just among low educated, but across all race and ethnic groups. And geographic areas is another thing that we looked at. We did, however, find in this paper that in terms of drug use, we do find the sort of traditional different educational gradients, that low education is associated with much higher uses of opioid abuse for whites and blacks and Hispanics, and for whites and blacks in terms of other prescription drug abuse in the last 30 days. That was that paper. Taylor Hargrove led a paper that examined the patterns of sort of depression at the intersections of race, ethnicity, and gender across age. So you can see that we're really trying to exploit the longitudinal data here, and this also is difficult to see, but you see that the women are in the red and men are in the in the blue. So you have the rates of depression, of course, higher among women than men. And the pattern is basically the same. It's high in adolescence, it goes down in these the early middle 20s when young people think, yeah, I'm in good shape, the whole world is at my and then reality starts to hit in. Early 30s seems to be a very consistent pattern. But there are true, if you did not look at it according to these subgroups, you would miss some of the nuances here. So you see that, for example, Hispanic women start out really quite high in adolescence, but then they become one of the lower groups as they age into the 30s. And I think the same is true for Asian men. And then the last paper, Ping Chen and I also took advantage of the fact that we have CESD, or a measure of depression across the life course. And we had published earlier on some of these measures of sort of family climate and family context, and there's a measure of family cohesion, and we also have one on conflict. And we're just curious to see how it was associated with these trajectories over time. And actually pretty surprised to find that obviously in adolescence there, because that's when the family cohesion measure occurs, there is this sort of protection against depression. This is for men, and I'll show you women in a second, such that adolescents who are part of a more cohesive family, they do things with each other, with family members alive, everybody gets along, so on and so forth. And it narrows it down, of course, the gap becomes much more narrow over time, but these differentials continue into midlife, and it's greater for women than for men. All the way across, this gap is significant. And I thought you might be interested in looking at the distribution of the deaths that we've identified. These are the causes of the manner of death, just what you would expect for young adults. Most deaths are occurring due to accidents or natural causes. We do see some suicides, we have homicides, and undetermined. We don't want to break down into any minor categories just for disclosure. And so let me just say a couple words about the AdHealth Parent Study. So this was a 20-year follow-up interview of parents of the AdHealth sample members. And I should acknowledge in condensing my slides, I forgot to include my principal investigator, who is Joe Hutz at Duke. The two of us carried this out. These are parents of the AdHealth respondents who were interviewed at wave 1 in 1995. These are mostly mothers. And at that time, they were aged 35 to 50. So these are actually the baby boom parents. They're re-interviewed in AdHealth Parent Study. They're now 55 to 70. The time period was 2015 to 2017. And what it is, it's a small sample. It's a random sample of a little over 2,000 biological, adoptive, or step parents who were interviewed in wave 1. And then we also interviewed their current spouse partner. We got 988, almost 2,000. This is the content. And what's cool, what we're excited about with this is that some of these, to the best ability that we could, we tried to repeat measures in the parent study that are asked in the AdHealth respondent. So we've got the same big 5 personality dimensions. We have the same cognitive measures that we have on the AdHealth respondent. We included the grit index. We also included data wave 5. We have measures on support and social integration that are similar in both. And then, of course, we, to the best ability that we could, we replicated the health measures. Let's see here. So this is these data were released in 2019. 2013 wave 1 parents, 988 spouse partners. About half of those 988 were the biological, for the most part, father, the biological other parent of the adult respondent. So, that's quite valuable. And then if you look at it from the perspective of the adult sample members, it's about it's 2,247 because some of the parents had multiple children who were in the adult data. And I guess one of the more innovative things that we did is actually I'm so proud of this because I've been thinking about this for a long time, and that is that how could we get health data on the adult respondent from their family. And I thought if we just created this kind of like checklist, like when you go into a doctor's office and they're asking you biological father, mother. So we put this together, and this is what it looked like. It's just one page. I guess it was front and back. And we left this as a leave behind with the adult parents who were interviewed in person, and then asked them to send it in. So I mean, we really had no idea. You always want to include some kind of high risk, cool thing, and see if it works out. Probably most of the time it doesn't. But we were surprised that 70% turned it in. Maybe that's a function of being older and having more time. And it gives us some interesting data. So for example, put this together. This is still very preliminary because the wave 5 data might actually come from sample 1. But what you can see is that, so this is the ad hoc sample member, this is the parent. This is these prevalences are coming from the parent survey. And then these are coming from the health history that they just reported on. So they reported on, both of their grandparents. So for the most part, these are the maternal grandparents because the ad health parent respondent is a woman, is female, a mother. And then we did not break it down by gender for the great grandparents, but you see sort of expected that obviously high cholesterol is going to be greater in the older generation. They finish their lives, everybody's going to get cancer. Again, not really exact, but you see a flip in terms of obesity. So obesity is much more prevalent in the younger generation, right? And interestingly, same for depression, more prevalent in the younger generation. So that's some interesting data. I think that might be it. So let me see if there's any questions, 1 or 2, and then turn it over to Bob, and we'll probably have time for more questions as well. Yeah.
In the paper that UNC-Chapel published,
Yeah.
About family cohesion, did you all account for them having their own family?
I don't remember. But
I can look it up now that I know.
Yeah, but I mean, again, I can. Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the only thing we might have controlled for is marital status, but maybe not children. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so thank you. And I think one of the key messages here is that data, at least the survey data, are available, and please use them for everybody here and out there. Okay, so looking ahead to wave 6, we're in this transition period right now, and in the over the last 2 or 3 years or so, Kathy and then Allison and myself have been working on plans for wave 6, going back and forth with the folks at NIA, with many other folks at other governmental institutions and so forth. And we expect the RFA, the request for applications, to come out for wave 6 literally any day now. It's been a lot of presentations, a lot of pre-proposals and so forth. And we're at the point right now where I think all the approvals have gone through NIA, and we expect this actually to be able to send in a proposal here later this spring. So the signs are good, and we've got an incredibly unique and rich data source, and we want to continue this into the foreseeable future. So we'll still be working on the proposal this spring, but all of the preliminary work has been done and has gone well. Okay, so the context for Wave 6, if you think about the main ad health cohort, as described by Kathy and Carolyn here, that we're now moving into midlife. They were born, or many of them in 1979 or 80, give or take a few years. They're presently with Wave 5, age 37 on average. And as we look ahead to Wave 6, they'll be on average 43 or so years old by the time we get back in the field and collect their data again. In a nutshell, their health is not good. Kathy and Carolyn showed some data here that obesity levels for Wave 5 maybe 41 to 43% or so. We won't get the final figures until we get the biomarker estimates out as well. So we've never seen in human history a cohort like that. Depression levels look very high as well. And then, as you know, over the last 5 years or so, NIA has funded some work across the nation where we see these increasing levels of deaths due to drug poisonings to suicide. And just today, there's an article that came out this morning that I saw on increasing death rates due to alcohol abuse throughout the United States, both in this age range and others at higher ages as well. So we really do have a cohort moving through young adulthood and now moving into middle adulthood where we consider them to be not in very good health. Death and mortality rates actually going up, health problems increasing, at least along some dimensions, cancer death rates actually going down. So that's maybe the one good story here that we have for large due to smoking decreases and not due to anything that Trump did. So that's the one key and important exception. But for everything else, things don't look very good. So the context for Wave 6 that we're selling in the proposal is that there's a lot of concerns, behavioral health, mental health, cardiometabolic, and one of the big innovations that we're looking to in Wave 6 is to develop better measures of cognitive health and sensory functioning as well. Cognitive health, that we're going to increase the size of the in-home subsample to be able to better tap into measures of cognitive health where we can be in the home and actually measure those things as well as physical functioning. You think about people at age range, say, we're thinking on average 43 or 44 years old. But when I took a quick look at Wave 5 data here, I don't have a slide for this, but the percentage of people who report difficulty climbing stairs in Wave 5 at age 37, 38 on average is something on the order of 30% at these ages. So we're going to go into the home and collect data on physical functioning, on walking, hand grip strength, and other kinds of things as well. Because given the health of the cohort that we see so far, we're expecting to see quite a bit of physical functioning issues even as early as people in their 40s. It's also time to critically examine disparities in health as well. And we've got a lot of literature coming out here in the last 5 years as well that's showing increasing disparities in all kinds of measures of health across socioeconomic levels, by education and by income, and across geographic areas as well. On the flip side, we do see some decreasing racial and ethnic disparities in health too, which is some good news. But at the same time, we want to continue to not only monitor these disparities, but also develop better explanations for them as well as this cohort is aging. The other thing that we're playing into the proposal as well is, the U.S. does not have a birth to death data set, cohort data set. We've never had one to follow people from the time they were born to the time they die. We think ad health is probably the closest thing we have to that right now, especially given the Wave 5 efforts to go back and collect some birth certificates, to collect early life kind of data as well. And we've followed the cohort now for 25 years and hope to do so for the rest of their lives. So we have a real, not only a cohort that's not doing particularly well in terms of health, but also a very unique data set in the sense that we will be able to have at least some data on these folks from birth to death for many of them. Okay, so all that said, the overall goal for Wave 6 is really to understand the life course exposures for health disparities and health among early midlife Americans, and especially in terms of cognition, physical and sensory functioning, so substance abuse and use, mental health, and cardiometabolic health. In part, the RFA that will come out any day now will we'll see which NIH institutes are funding or are going to help to fund Wave 6 and tailor the proposal a bit to which institutes end up signing on to the effort. So we'll tweak this a bit depending on who the actual funders turn out to be. NIA, we know it's going to be the new funder. Okay, so in terms of the aims, unlike earlier versions of Ad Health, the 4 program projects that Kathy mentioned over the 25-year history of Ad Health to date, NIA is planning to fund Ad Health based on largely a U01 mechanism, which is let's call it cooperative agreement, means we're working together with the folks at NIA to produce this data set. So there will be a project scientist from NIA that's going to be seriously involved in the design of Ad Health and the carry out of Ad Health. And at the same time, we also won't have research projects themselves embedded within the Wave 6 of Ad Health. This will be a data collection and dissemination effort, and the projects, writing papers, and so forth, will come from other grant proposals that we put together to analyze the data. So for Wave 6, we're strictly thinking about collecting the data, organizing it, and disseminating. So, it's a pretty simple plan that we have in place, that we're going to collect the data, survey data, contextual data, and biological data. Largely the similar kind of design that you saw for Wave 5, although I'll show you one slide here on more in-depth design in a minute. The biggest thing that I would like to do for Wave 6 is number 2. Is, we've got a chance here as people are moving into midlife and as the funding agency changes from NICHD to NIA, to what I call maintain the longitudinal integrity of the data set as the cohort gets older. We've got to continue to collect some of the same measures to maintain that integrity, while at the same time innovating on key devices. And the innovations that I'm thinking about most seriously include those focused on disparities, better understanding how discrimination, how stress, coping, people in their 40s, their work-life balance, and also, what I think about is the sandwich generation here, caregiving for kids and for older adults, and how that plays into the health disparities that we're seeing in the data set. So this last fall, a number of graduate students and I, we got together and went through the Wave 5 questionnaire and thought about new items for Wave 6. We had those archived, and as as we have that opportunity to develop new items comes into play for Wave 6, we'll go back to that and try to add some of the key measures that we've been thinking about. On the kind of more biological side or the health side, we also want to enrich the collection of cognitive and sensory data and physical functioning data, as I mentioned before. Sensory, in terms of a few months ago, we got in the mail, Sarah, they basically smell. I remember when my dad was getting dementia, one of the first things is the smell. Starts to go back, can't smell the same, and so we got these basically smell sticks that we're going to be able to give people, and can they identify onion versus motor oil versus pickles, something, and there's 40 of those to be able, and hopefully we can use those kind of things across time. But we're also planning collecting data on vision and hearing and others as well. And then finally, the fourth aim would be just to get the data ready and disseminate it to the public. That's what we're all about. Okay, and finally, this is a little bit of more in-depth, but thinking about the design of Wave 6. Again, this may be tweaked a bit depending on exactly what comes in the RFA. That we'll have roughly 19,500 people still eligible for that are still alive and still eligible for inclusion in Wave 6. We're going to go after all of them, even if they haven't we haven't heard from them since wave one. They're still an ad health sample member, and we'll continue to try to pursue them through through tracing efforts at RTI particularly, and then through our own kind of panel maintenance efforts as well. But we'll be trying to find all of them. Roughly 3/4 of them will be asked to complete the survey via web. We found out we can do this. We can do this well from wave 5. People answer the survey, and we can do up to probably an hour-long web survey in wave 6. So then continuing on down on that side of the slide, that there will be non-respondents from the web. We think, I think the web survey last in wave 5 was something like a 55% response rate. And again, through learning about how to do this now and through better contacts and so forth, we are aiming for a 60% response rate on the web. And then there will be non-respondents, 6,000 of them, roughly non-respondents. Some of those we won't go after, we won't continue to go after. But the key thing is that those we will go after in the non-respondents are going to be largely racial and ethnic minority sample members and low education sample members. Because again, we want to maintain sample size across health disparity subpopulations in order to do work across them. So there will be a lot of our efforts going toward this box here to be able to find the non-respondents in particular key subpopulations. On the other side, we'll select roughly 4,500 or so folks for the in-person survey. This increases the size of that in-person survey compared to wave 5. If you remember, Kathy and Carolyn talked about 1,100 or so of those folks who answered the survey in person. But because of our emphasis on cognition and physical functioning in wave 6, we need to measure a lot of those items in home. So we'll be going back to the 1,100 who answered in home in wave 5, as well as triple or quadruple the size of that in-home sample as well. Again, we're going to oversample here for racial and ethnic minority populations and low SES in order to build the sample size to do work, to look at disparities in cognition, for example, physical functioning across the subpopulations. So we were successful. The response rate for in-home in wave 5 was about 71%. We're aiming to do roughly the same thing in wave 6. And again, you put these together, both the in-person and the web survey, and and kind of filter down through. We're hoping to get a total of over 13,000 individuals in wave 6. Again, that's higher than wave 5, but again, I think in wave 5 we got better along the way as we never really get 12,300 as things were moving along, and we I think learned how to do the web survey, played with incentives and did other things along the way, more mailings and so forth, in order to increase our sample size. So overall, that looks like the design. Everybody will be asked to consent for an in-home biological visit, either the web respondents or the in-home survey respondents. We'll ask the same thing: would you allow us to come into your home to collect blood? Those that do will be, those that consent to do so, then they'll be asked to give blood, and we'll be collecting blood from them. Again, this is a new thing in wave 5, stumbled out of the gate trying to do this. We learned a lot along the way and did better and better and better, including with a different company halfway through that collects the blood that helped us to arrive at the 5,000 that we got. But given all the lessons that we learned, we're optimistic that we're able to do better with the blood collection in wave 6. Okay, so I think that's in a nutshell, the basic design for wave 6, including this kind of two-part web and in-person design. Again, the surveys, the content, and the blood collection. Again, this presentation was based on data supported by NICHD and other funding agencies along the way. So we continue to be very thankful for their contributions to health for 25 years now, and all the co-funders as well that have continued to fund health. So we've got a couple minutes for any last questions, and we can all stay for a few minutes afterward if you got more in-depth questions. So questions about wave 6 design or other wave 5 piece? We don't want to write the application. We got it. Has anybody accessed wave 5 data yet? Yeah, hopefully you do. I mean, it's there, it's available, it's ready for everybody. If not, thank you for coming. Hope you do use the data. Produce one paper a day. See you next week.